Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to be breaking down the 16-game college basketball slate for tomorrow. It's the first round of the NCAA tournament. It's Thursday games. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? So I'm just going to go through each individual game here and kind of break down what I think about each game and their team players that are in it, So let's go and get started here with the Mississippi State-Michigan State game. Now this game features 130-point total and a 1-point spread with Michigan State's favor. This is one of the lowest totals on the slate. I think this is the second lowest. Only the Tennessee game's lower. And so it's probably a game that there's not a ton of like great plays from, but there is one. But we'll start with Michigan State here. So I do like AJ Hoggard a little bit. He does need about 27 fantasy points to pay off here. He's not a great play, but he's an okay play. He does get in that range quite a bit, so he has some potential today. And if this game stays close, then he'll probably have more upside. But he definitely is kind of a contrarian play today. He's a little bit pricey for what his potential is on this particular one. Moving to the other options on the team, I do think Tyson Walker and Jaden Akins have some upside as well, but they definitely carry a lot of risk. As for the Mississippi State Bulldogs here, my favorite play from this team is Tolu Smith. Now he is going to be a very interesting play as he needs around 27 fantasy points to pay off. If you notice in his last few games, he had some rough ones, but he's had big games throughout the season, so he's a lot of upside here. He's just underpriced for this matchup, and so that gives him a lot of utility here as a great option on this one at $6,800. So he definitely draws a good start, a good situation, and a pretty good opportunity there. I would say Josh Hubbard is a decent play, as well as Cameron Matthews. Cameron Matthews seems like a secondary play to me, but he definitely has some potential as well. Moving on to Duquesne and BYU. This game does feature a pretty good total of 142 points in BYU's favor. And while they do have some plays for these two teams do have some potential. I don't really like it for fantasy very much. The only guy that I have a lot of potential in is Jimmy Clark, but he is a little bit overpriced here for this matchup, as he should be able to get decent fantasy point output, but he is on the underdog team here, and he definitely has a lower floor than I would like, so he's squarely a GPP only play. He definitely has some potential, but definitely a risky option. Looking at other players on Duquesne here, I do think Drame is interesting, so is Dede Grant, but outside of that, there's really not much there. There's a couple of value guys like DeMichael that has a little bit of potential, but they're definitely high risk. BYU, on the other hand, they play a very deep rotation. That's definitely going to hurt us here. If I was going to use anybody from this team, it would be Dallin Hall, as he needs 26 fantasy points to pay off here, but he's definitely risky on this one because he does play the more minutes. He's definitely just squarely a GPP play. Like I said, this game is kind of avoidable because it's a lot of kind of high risk kind of game here. Looking over at Akron and Creighton, this game does feature a pretty lopsided potential game here with a 12-point spread in Creighton's favor. They also have 141-point total. Now, Creighton is a team that is very stackable. Now, you're not going to have a lot to stack at the top, but it's just the two top guys basically, and Shireman here. He needs 38 fantasy points to pay off here. I think he'll get that relatively easy in this one. The bigger risk here maybe is if this game gets out of hand early, but he definitely has a lot of potential. He's probably one of my favorite plays on the slate overall. And then Cockbrenner, he also has a lot of upside here. He's had some absolutely monster games, but I like Shireman better, but I do think Cockbringer is a good play as well. And so I like both these guys quite a bit, though they are both extremely expensive. You could also look at Trey Alexander as a secondary play on this one as a pretty decent option for them, as he's played fairly well lately. So and he's a little bit cheaper than those two guys. Looking over at Akron, though, we do have some value here. Now the big question is if how are they going to pay off, but Enrique Freeman definitely has the potential to break out and have a big game here, though this is definitely a risky play, but he is probably my favorite player on this team. He's their best player, and he definitely has that March Madness feel to him, as he can score fantasy points in bunches throughout the season. He's had some absolutely monster games, and he has that upside with that, and his price is not as high as I expected, so Ali is also an interesting play, and then we do have one value play in Nate Johnson, but he's definitely carrying some risk today or in the slate because he has an extremely low floor. But do keep that in mind. So moving in from the next game here, we're going to look at Long Beach State and Arizona. Now this is where we're going to find some interesting plays that are going to be risky but have some potential. We'll start with Arizona, who's the better team here. It's a um, Arizona is favored to win this game by 20 points, so that is the problem. But this has a high ceiling when it comes to the totals on the slate as 161 points. In fact, this is the highest scoring game on this entire slate. Only Oakland and Kentucky are even within 10 points of that. So this is going to be a very fun. Oh, sorry. This is actually the second highest because the Kentucky Oakland game is the first. My bad. With that said, this is going to be a game that definitely have some potential from. My favorite play from Arizona is Keyshawn Johnson, as he is a stat stuffer and he has a lot of potential to have a really good game here. He needs around 26 fantasy points to pay off. Now, he has had some lower games recently, but he's been pretty inconsistent throughout the year, but he has some potential, so he's definitely worth a look. I do think Larson and Boswell both have a lot of risk on this one, but I do like Caleb Love some too, as he has some good opportunity here, and he's a little bit cheaper than he's been in a while. Though he's had some ups and downs recently, as he's had two sub 10 fantasy point games. But he has had big games throughout the season. He's kind of a contrarian play just because he hasn't been that great as of late. And then Omar Ballo, he's probably overall the best player on this team, and he's had a lot of upside in this game here. He is priced up, but he needs 34 fantasy points to pay off, and I do think he'll get in the mid 30s at the very least here, so that right at 30 at least. So I think he has some potential in this one. Looking at Long Beach State, now they are not a great team, but they are going to run the ball a lot, and we have a couple guys that have some potential here. One being Abakar Traore, sorry, butchering your name, but he is a triple double machine. In fact, he had a triple double in that conference tournament for them. He can stack up the fantasy points in bunches. He only needs 30 fantasy points to pay off here, and if you look at his season, he's had a lot of games in those ranges. Even early in the year when he played some tougher teams, he did decent, like against Michigan and Iona. But during conference play, he just dominated for a while. So he's definitely somebody that's interesting. He's priced up though, so it's definitely a little bit of risk, but he definitely has some capability. His brother also has some utility here. Now he doesn't have that crazy upside that Abakar does, but he does have some potential in this one, and he's definitely a secondary play to his brother or even a contrarian option there. I also think Marcus Sahonis, sorry, I'm butchering your name, I'm sure. I think he has some potential today as well, as he has a very good potential to get a lot of shots in this one, and he'll definitely be out there for for around 30 plus minutes, and that will give him some upside. Definitely carries a little bit of risk, but has some interesting value based on his price here. Just needs 25 fantasy points, and I think he can get there. You could also look at AJ George and Jaden Jones from this team, though they definitely both carry a lot of risk. They are decent, though, priced. Moving into the Wagner, North Carolina game. This game does feature a big spread with 24.5 points in UNC's favor. It has a pretty low floor as well. But one thing it does have is it has a couple of value plays that we can definitely hang our hats on today. Those being one being from from Wagner is Esquerra, excuse me, Javier Esquerra. He is just criminally underpriced here. I don't know why. Um, it kind of makes me laugh because yesterday uh, in the playing game he was very underpriced, and he of course paid off very nicely for us. At $4,300, even if he gets like 15 fantasy points, we'll be happy. He's going to play max minutes in this one, and he's got a lot of upside here as a result because he's a pretty good passer and pretty good at getting some rebounds and stuff. He doesn't even have to shoot that much to pay off here, so he looks like a very solid play. I also like Melvin Council Jr. He's Wagner's best player, and he pretty much dominated the ball yet in their playing game. Now he does have a low floor, and that is a little bit of a concern here. But he has a nice ceiling, and he in this pace-up game, he's going to get a lot of shots. And if you like March Madness, he's the kind of player that has that March Madness feel to him, as he can go up for big scores. And if you look at his season, he's had a lot of over 30 fantasy point games. In fact, he averaged 30 over the season. And so, even if we look back early in the year, we found some decent games against Providence and Manhattan, who was pretty good at the time, and a couple others. So he's had some really big games throughout the year, and it didn't seem like the team he's going up against is really a big risk for him. Looking at UNC, the top three guys are RJ Davis, Armando Bacot, and Ingram, and they all have some potential today, but this is not the best matchup for them because of the blowout risk, and their prices have come up quite a bit. So I'm not really loving any of them, but they definitely have that nice upside if you know, if you think this game stays relatively close. I just think it's a slowdown game, so it's kind of hard to like anybody from North Carolina, really. I think Baycot's probably the safest play on the team, but honestly, he's not been super consistent throughout the year. Looking at the next game here in Moorhead in Illinois, um, we have some potential here with this game being 147 point total, which is pretty high on this particular slate. Uh, I should note that there hasn't been a ton of there isn't a ton of value play on the slate to like, so make sure to check in on these value plays. But for this Moorhead State Illinois game, we do have a nice total here with 147 points. Illinois is favored to win by 11. I do like a lot of Moorhead State today, as they have some really good options here, and one of the top ones are going to be Minix here for them at $8,400. He is a stat stuffer. He is a top tier option for this entire slate. I expect him to play max minutes and have a lot of upside. He's been playing very well, and he plays a ton of minutes. He's been playing well all season long. He's just averaging 40 fantasy points a game. Uh, and he really didn't have a drop off too bad early in the season when he played against good teams. So, like against Purdue, he had 27 fantasy points, and Bama 33 fantasy points. So he had some big games too against Chattanooga uh, and others. So he's got a lot of upside potential in this one. Obviously, his price is super high, but he needs 34 fantasy points to pay off, and he can clearly do that. Other guys I do like here are Thomas, Thelwell, and Lassen for them. All three of these guys are priced relatively similarly. I would like Lassen the best, with Thomas being second and Thelwell being third, but they're definitely all three guys that you could throw in. They all play guard though, so I am going to mix and match those guys probably, but they all have some nice upside potential in this one, especially if this game stays somewhat close, which I think it might. They have some really good potential, but Lassen has been a little bit more inconsistent than the other two, but he's got the most upside for this game. So then we'll also look at Eddie Ricks. Now Ricks has some value here, but he is very risky. Uh, but he's had some really good games lately. He just has a lower floor. I think he's a little bit riskier than maybe I'd like on the slate for the price, but he definitely has that potential. Looking at Illinois, my goodness, Terrence Shannon has been playing monster basketball lately. However, he does carry a huge price tag, so he's going to be hard to roster here. If I roster anybody from Illinois, it's going to be Coleman Hawkins. He's got the best upside on this team, but he definitely carries kind of a GPP play only. He's not. He's priced pretty fairly, but he's a little bit risky here. Domsack is a little overpriced, and then I was kind of avoidable on the other guys because they're just a little bit overpriced as well. Looking at Oregon and South Carolina, this game features a lot of guys I do like today. Oregon's got a couple of dudes that really stand out to me. With Dante here. Hang on one second. I'm sorry. Trying to get my thing to scroll up. Okay, there it is. Dante here is as good as pretty much anybody on the slate for them. He has some really big upside here. Now, I should note that this game does feature a very tight game at just 1 point spread in South Carolina's favor. And it's pretty even in the KenPom, with South Carolina being 49 and Oregon being 55. 132 point spread, which is not super high, but with it being a tight game and they're priced kind of fairly, I think Dante definitely draws in some really good potential today. He only needs 34 fantasy points to pay off here. It's hard to imagine him not making that in this one, as I do think that that the total here is probably a little bit low for what I think will actually happen, and so he's definitely somebody to consider a lot. Jermaine Cosinard is also in play. He'll get plenty of minutes, but he definitely has some risk here. And then Jadaron Tracy for Oregon, also very interesting today, as he's kind of a good value play. He's going to get a ton of minutes, though he hasn't particularly hit the 20 plus fantasy points a lot. He does have that potential. He's had some ups and downs throughout the season. Right now, he's a little bit struggling, but maybe he can break out here in this one. He's got a decent upside there. Looking over at South Carolina, this is an interesting option here is Colin Murray Bowles. Now, he's their best player, but he is overpriced, and so that is a little bit of a concern here. But he definitely has that potential as he needs 32 fantasy points to pay off. And then Talon Cooper, he's an interesting play here. He's a risky play, but he definitely has some potential. I do think that the Oregon players are a little bit safer, and I think I can find other guys at $6,300 that are better priced players, better options at least on this slate than Cooper is. So overall, that game, I think Oregon has some guys, but you probably want to avoid South Carolina for the most part. Looking at Nevada and Dayton, now this game features a 1 point spread as well in Nevada's favor and 136.5. Now this might be a game that we can pull some guys from, but they definitely carry some risk. I feel like for Dayton first, Holmes is probably the best player on their team, though he is extremely pricey. He is a top tier play though, as he has that monster upside, but he's going to be hard to roster at this price. For them, as he just has a lot of difficulty when it comes. He just has a lot of difficulty holding in the lineup with the lack of kind of great value plays across the board here, but there are a few. Looking over at Santos for them as well, he does have some potential, but he's somebody that's to me is squarely a GPP play at this point. He does have that little bit of upside though that gives him some potential. But Nevada, they're a decent defensive team. In fact, both these teams have been above average than defense on the season. Looking at Nevada, though, I really do like them a lot, and Kenan Blackshear is definitely one of the reasons why. He's actually priced down here some, which really gives him a lot of upside. He does need about 28 fantasy points to pay off here, and he averages right around that throughout the season. So I'm a little surprised his price came down this much, but he's somebody I'm definitely going to consider as a decent option on the slate. Not a must play, but he's definitely underpriced a little bit, which gives him some potential. And then Nick Davidson, also interesting on this slate, as he has some good upside and a pretty good price point as well. However, he does have issues with fouling sometimes, and so that would be a concern in this game against the defense there. But he definitely has some potential. I don't really like much else from that game, so let's move on to the CSU Texas game. Now Colorado State is the 30th KenPom team, and Texas is 27th. I think this game is a coin flip. It has a higher total at 144 than I really expected it to be, but there's a couple of reasons why. Because we have Desu here, who's been absolutely phenomenal down the stretch, and he has some big time upside. Now he does have that super low floor because he gets in foul trouble, and that is a concern here. But if he can stay out of foul trouble, he should be able to eclipse the 28 fantasy points he needs. Pretty good in this one, but he definitely carries a lot of risk because of that. Dylan Mitchell is also in play, but he's very contrarian today. I don't really love him. Looking over at Colorado State, Isaiah Stevens and Clifford both have some potential today, and they do have good upside. They also just handled Virginia's defense pretty well. I expect them to play well in this one as well, and they're kind of decent plays, but they are priced up, so they're not the greatest options on the slate. Then we're going to move on to the Kentucky Oakland game, and this is definitely a place where we can find some mid-range value. Not a lot of great value, but mid-range value here. And we'll start with Oakland. Now, this game does feature the highest total on the slate at 163 points. Kentucky is favored to win the game by 13.5, so do keep that in mind. Kentucky's defense is very suspect, though, and so we have some options here to exploit that. Trey Townsend is a very interesting play for Oakland, as he's kind of a do-everything forward. Obviously, Kentucky has struggled at times against big guys, and this is a guy that can definitely do that. Can definitely hurt that. Trey Mitchell on Kentucky seems to play very similarly to Trey Townsend, and I think Trey Townsend has a really good opportunity for a monster fantasy game, as he's just a usage monster and a stat stuffer. So I do like his upside, though he is pretty expensive for this one. Blake Lampkin is a guy that's going to shoot some threes, and that's going to give him some opportunity to have a nice game here. He's fairly priced at just $5,800. He needs 23 points to pay off here, fantasy wise, and that gives him a lot of potential. I do like his upside in this one, and I think that there's going to be somebody for this team that probably goes off for threes, and it's probably going to be him or Jake Golick here. Sorry, sorry. Sorry about that. My mic broke there. With that said, we're going to look at Jack Golick, excuse me. Now he's at 5,600 points, $5,600. He just needs 22 fantasy points to pay off here. Now he's done that throughout the season. He shoots more threes than anybody in the country, and I expect him to hit a bunch in this game, and that gives him a lot of potential here against Kentucky. Now I will mention that Kentucky is my team, so uh, uh, I do expect them to give up some threes in this one, and Gohick is definitely a guy that we are concerned about from that perspective. Other guys on this team, DQ Cole would get a boost if Isaiah Watts is out, or sorry, if Rocket Watts is out, and that looks like it might be the case today, so to keep that in mind as well. Let's move on to Kentucky. Now, Kentucky is a team that's actually kind of avoidable on this game, even though it has a high total because everybody's overpriced. Dillingham can obviously get hot, as can Reed Shepard, and Antonio Reeves is super consistent. Wagner has not played great down the stretch. Neither has Mitchell, but they're both back from injuries and playing a little bit better. And then who knows which round of the other guys and Big Z, Darrow, Edwards, Anyenzo, and Bradshaw get the biggest amount of minutes inside. So it's going to be kind of a round robin from that. We're so deep, it's hard to and on a big slate like this, they're pretty much avoidable unless you think Dillingham is going to go absolutely monster or nuclear, which could definitely happen because he's definitely got that capability. I think Dillingham's probably the best play on the team, but he definitely carries some risk in this one simply because it could get out of hand early. Looking at McNeese State and Gonzaga here, we do have some interesting options here with Gonzaga being a 6.5 point favorite and 150 point total. This is one of the bigger totals on the slate. I do have a couple guys from McNeese that I think have some utility, and Christian Shoemate would be one of them that carries a lot of risk with this defense, and he has a very low floor as a result of that. But he does have some upside. And then C.J. Felder, now he has some potential here, but he's very risky value play. And I think there's other guys that have the similar ceilings, and but without the low floor at this price range. So while he's in play, he's kind of a GPP risky play. Looking over at Gonzaga, Ryan Nimhard, Anton Watson, and Ben Gregg are the best options, with Graham Mike being a secondary play. They're all a little bit overexpensive here, except for Anton Watson. In fact, Anton looks like a very solid play at $7,200, and he's somebody I really like a lot today. And so he's definitely somebody to consider on the slate, but he definitely carries some risk. Looking over at the next game here, we're going to look at South Dakota State and Iowa State. We've got a few games left here. So with South Dakota State, uh, they do have some. They do have one play that's somewhat interesting, and that is William Kyle. Though he is not a great play, he's a GPP only play. He's got some ups and downs through the season, but I do like him in this matchup, and he has some potential. Though I do think this is going to be a slower down game. Iowa State is a team that tends to slow it down, and this is one of the lower totals on the slate. And Iowa State is also projected to win by 17, which is one of the higher totals on the slate in general. But looking over at Iowa State, we do like a couple guys here. Keyshawn Gilbert is probably the best play on the team, but he definitely carries some risk. He's a little bit overpriced for this matchup and potential, especially if he gets out of hand early. Then Lipsy also has some utility, but he's a little bit safer than Gilbert, but doesn't have quite the upside in this matchup. And then I also like Curtis Jones a little bit, but he seems like a pretty risky value because he's a little bit overpriced for his potential here. So I think you can find cheaper guys than him, but he's definitely somebody to consider looking at. Looking at St. Peter's and Tennessee, and if you saw the post on Reddit about the the fact that a team with the with a dick joke in the name, beating a 1 or 2 seed over the last few years, and this is one of those games that you could consider as a matchup possibility. Now, St. Peter's, on the other hand, is one of the lowest rated teams in this tournament, so uh, at just 134 in the sorry, 187 on the Kimpom, which is the lowest for the slate outside of Wagner. I think that they do have a couple guys that have some upside, but they definitely carry some risk. That'd be Corey Washington and Latrell Reed. I don't think that either one of them are great plays, but I do feel like they're pretty priced fairly, as in they have that potential. Looking at Reed, he's averaged 24 fantasy points a game, and he only needs 20 to pay off here, but he has that low floor. And then Corey Washington, he's had some good games throughout the season. And this should be a game that has a little bit of a tempo to it, but still, Tennessee does tend to play pretty good, tough defense, and being that be lopsided, it may get a hand early. I do think Corey Washington though has as much upside as anybody on that particular in this particular game. However, but I don't really like too much else from St. Peter's, unless you think that they can do the crazy upset. You could look at Hogue for them, but otherwise they're pretty avoidable. Looking at Tennessee though, Dalton Connect is uber expensive today. I think he's going to be somewhat avoidable, to be honest. He has that upside and potential, but he's had some off games, and he doesn't necessarily need to score a whole bunch, and he is somewhat scoring dependent as well. At least he has been lately, so that does give him some potential, but risky. If Tennessee plays tough and keeps and the game is not too crazy, then Adu has some upside, but because he has an absolutely massive ceiling, but his blowout risk and the fact that he's overpriced, it does hurt his upside in this one. North Carolina State and Texas Tech is a game next here. Um, this game features a pretty good total of 145 points with Texas Tech's favor of 5. I do think Texas Tech handles this game pretty well. I don't think NC State is going to be able to stick with them for very long, but when we look at NC State, they do have some value plays. They have some utility. Morcell, Daria, Horn, Burns, and O'Connell have all played pretty well the last few games. However, they haven't really played a game against a team uh, like Texas Tech here, and I think Texas Tech is going to be able to be a good option team here. Pop Isaacs is my favorite play from this slate, as he has some potential today, especially with nice upside, and his price is pretty fair. Darian Williams is questionable. If he were to play, then he'll have some utility here. We do have a punt play in Toussaint as well. Well, not really a punt play, but just a good value play in Toussaint as well at $6,100, as he has some upside here as well. But he definitely carries a little bit of risk, but not too much. He's just kind of a, contrarian GPP type play. Looking over at Samford and Kansas, this features a pretty big, tighter game than we expected earlier because Kevin McCullough is out for the tournament. Kansas is now in a dangerous situation, and Samford is actually a pretty decent team to be in a dangerous situation against. I think they can pull this upset off. It has a high total too at 153 points. If Samford can stay in it, then they're going to have some potential here. Fantasy wise, they look like really good values as well. We have a couple guys that are somewhat risky, but like Anchor, he's their best player. He's only $5,800. He has a big ceiling, and he only needs 23 fantasy points to pay off here. I don't know. I think they're pricing him like this because he's had foul trouble games throughout the year. But as long as he stays in the game and plays, throughout it, he's going to have some upside because he'll play a lot of minutes. But we have a couple other guys from this team we do like a lot as well, and that would be Jermaine Marshall. He's a good value play here. He's got some really high upside, though a low floor. We'll also look at Raylan Jones. He's also got a pretty nice ceiling for his potential, and he's played well the last 4 games, and his minutes have increased. Jaden Campbell, also a guy that you have to consider based on his potential upside, though he does carry a little bit of risk than the others. Looking at Kansas, we do have 3 guys that we like a lot. Hunter Dickinson, assuming he plays, he's going to have all sorts of upside in this matchup. He definitely carries some risk, but at the price point, but he has all that potential, and so he's definitely worth a look. John Furphy played very well when McCullough went down early in the season, and I expect him to kind of do that again here. He's going to have to get 25 to 30 fantasy points to make up for that at the very least. He does need a little bit more than that to pay off, but he's definitely capable. He's a little bit overpriced. Dejon Harris also gets a boost as a result, but he also seems a little overpriced. And so while there are some good options from Kansas, they seem relatively avoidable here. Moving into the last game here, the Drake and Washington State games. This game does feature one of the tighter games on the slate with a 2 point favorite to Drake, actually. But from a fantasy perspective, they don't have a lot to like. They really only have one guy, and that's DeVries. Though this is a tough matchup, and he has played very well. He's super expensive as well, so he is a GPP only play. Looking at the Washington State, though, I do like several players here, but they are contrarian plays, and Isaac Jones, Miles Rice, and Jalen Wells, they all three have some potential as contrarian plays. So overall, I think this slate is going to be pretty interesting. I think there's a lot of good plays on it, a lot of risky plays as well, but I think that you're going to have to find some value some places, and Samford is definitely a team that you can consider finding it in, and then we have some other guys across the board. One of the things I did note about this slate is that the higher seeded teams seem a little bit pricey, and then the lower seeded teams are seeing a little bit better value wise. And so if you see a game that you really think that there's going to be upset in, then that's the definite guys you want to target on this slate. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.